This week's Parsha is Chayei. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that in Eretz Yisrael, in the yeshivas, Parshas Chayei, they go to Hebron for Shabbos. It's a big thing, all the yeshivos, because this is the Parsha where Avraham Avinu purchases the Machpelah. It's always a big discussion about the security, but I think, tens of thousands of people go to Hebron.
Why we don't have Parsha Chayei Avraham and Chayei Sarah?
We have Chayei Avraham. Lech Lecha is Chayei Avraham. It's not called Chayei Avraham, but I'll share with you a shir that I had heard from my Rabbi Yochanan Zweig. I think it's just very pertinent, it's very timely, and it's just certain things you hear, they resonate, that you see that is the pshat in the parsha, and I just want to share that with you because I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think we've spoken about this a number of times already, but it's worth repeating. We have the first 20 psukim in this week's parsha are dedicated to the burial of Sarah Imenu. That's the negotiations, the discussions, all the intricate details about the burial plot, the Maras Machpelah in Hebron, the cave that was bought by Avram to bury Sarah. And the Ibn Ezra, one of the greatest of the Sephardic commentaries, great philosopher. I think the Rambam tells his son, Avram ben Harambam, he tells him that don't waste your time with any other commentaries. Ibn Ezra is the one you can learn. Ibn Ezra, Ibn Ezra is bothered by why do we need 20 psukim discussing this situation, what's the purpose of knowing all the details about the purchase that Avram did to find a burial spot for Sarah Imenu? So he says there's two main reasons. Number one, he says that you see from here the importance of being buried in Eretz Yisrael. See the efforts he went through to bury Sarah in Eretz Yisrael. So we see from here that it's very important to a person to be buried in Eretz Yisrael if possible. And then second thing, he says that this is the beginning of fulfillment of God's promise that the land will belong to you and your children. That God promised him, Kum hisalech ba'aretz, and it says, L'chonos atiyah, I'm going to give it, your children will inherit this land. That the purchase marks the beginning of the fulfillment of that promise. Okay, that's the statement. That's why there's so much ink dedicated to the purchase. So, Nachmanides, Rav Moshe ben Nachman, the Ramban, he looks at this Ibn Ezra, he brings it down, he says, it makes no sense. He says, if Sarah Imenu, if we see that she was buried in Iraq, and the story tells us how Avram schlepped her from Iraq and buried her in Eretz Yisrael, I understand, you see the importance of being buried in Eretz Yisrael. But where did she die? She died in Eretz Yisrael. How do you see the importance for somebody living outside of Eretz Yisrael to be buried in Eretz Yisrael if that's where she died? He says, I don't understand what he's talking about. And he says, and furthermore, he says, how is this the beginning of fulfillment of getting the land of Israel? They got the land of Israel some 400 years later When they came back with Yeshua and they conquered the 31 kings, that's when they fulfilled and got the land from Eretz Yisrael. This is not the beginning of the fulfillment of the land of Eretz Yisrael. They're going to get kicked out of here. When they get back, they come back, and that's when they get the land. So how is this even? See, this is both reasons I don't understand. I don't understand, number one, meaning the question is, why do we need all these psukim? Number one is because it's telling us the importance of being buried in Yisrael Ramban. I don't see it from here. And number two, that the premise is incorrect. This is not the beginning of us getting the land of Israel. The getting the land of Israel came in the time of Yeshua, 400 years later. So obviously we have to answer those questions. The psukim themselves, I'm going to go through just the storyline. We have Sarah dies, Avram comes to bury her and to eulogize her. And he starts negotiating. Now, who is he negotiating with? So, we see that the actual plot belonged to a fellow by the name of Ephron. Rashi brings down, on that day, Ephron was elevated to be a government official. He became a judge. So that Avram should be negotiating with someone of status. Itself needs a question. When Avram goes around the corner to buy tomatoes, and then that person becomes a government official because Avram's dealing. Every time Avram deals with somebody that's important, so that he should be dealing with somebody that's got status. That every time he dealt with somebody, that itself needs an explanation. But more than that, Avram doesn't deal only directly with Ephron ben Sohar. Avram speaks to the Bnei Ches. The land, Eretz Canaan was made up of a number of different Canaanite nations. The Hittites, the Chiti were one of them. This area happened to be under Chiti rule. So Avram is well respected. We see even Ephron wants to give it to him initially. Why does Avram have to go to the Bnei Ches and have them there at the discussion? Why not just go straight over to Ephron? Why is he dealing with the Bnei Ches as well? It's hard to understand. What do you need the Bnei Ches there? He just go straight. Deal and what? And it wouldn't have happened if the Bnei Ches weren't there. And if they don't need them there, why is the Torah even recording that the Bnei Ches were there?
But the land was for them.
They were the government was the Bnei Ches, but the one who owned the land was Ephron. So was he bringing over the Bnei Ches for just directly deal with Ephron, which at the end of the day, Ephron agrees to sell it to him. It's not, we don't see that he's being pushed into it by the Bnei Ches. He agrees. So then why do we need the Bnei Ches there? What was Avram even thinking that they should be there? The other thing I think is even more difficult to understand. And the Gemara says that, look, Avram never, I gave this land to Avram, it says, and he didn't even question, this is one of the 10, according to some Mefarshim, this is one of the 10 trials, that he had to go purchase the land for Sarai Meinu, even though I said I'm giving you the land. Avram has a status of a king. Avram is a very wealthy individual. He has tremendous amount of cattle and sheep. If you have that, you also must have a tremendous amount of holdings, of property. Why does he have to negotiate to purchase a burial plot for Sarai Meinu? Why not just bury her in one of the properties that you own? It can't be that he never owned property. He had to own property. If you own animals, you own property. He wasn't leasing the property, he owned property. So why does he have to say, and Hashem says, I considered it as one of the Nisan, he passed the test, that he didn't have any complaints that I have to purchase the property. Why did he have to? It's hard to understand. He had so much, he was such a wealthy person. Don't forget about it. Just bury her in one of your properties. There's the negotiation, goes back and forth, and Ephron changes. He doesn't want to give it away anymore, and then he makes him pay kesef maleh. Kesef maleh is It's multiple times more than what it was. A different type of coinage. I mean, it was 400, but it wasn't of the coins. It was a different type of coin. So Rashi breaks down that what was it? The pasuk says it was 400 shekel over la socher. What does it mean that it's over la socher? So Rashi says it's like an international currency. It's that they use the type of coins that could be used anywhere. Means it was he says it's money that can be used everywhere. He says we see a similar type of transaction by David HaMelech when David HaMelech bought Harabayas to build a Beis HaMikdash from Aravna. But it's that is the it's interesting why specifically they use that type of coinage that is over la socher. Over la socher. That's what the pasuk says. They used vayishkoli. They weighed out these specific coins. Okay, there's an international type of currency. Then pasuk says like this. That's one pasuk, and then the next one says like this: Vayakam's day Ephron asher Machpelah asher lifnei Mamre. So simple translation, Vayakam is it was established. It means established now in Avram's name. Rashi brings down Vayakam also means lashon of tkuma. What does tkuma means? The land became elevated. How to become elevated? So it went from the hands. If you would fill in the blanks. The land became elevated because Avram purchased it. So it went from the hands of A to the hands of B. What would you say A to B would be? From the hands of A? What would you say is that something becoming elevated because Avram bought it? Went from that? But that's not elevated. Why does it elevate? I buy a Slurpee. It doesn't become elevated. What does it mean that it becomes elevated? But it's what?
Somebody who's more...
As a holier person, you should went from the hands of a Rasha to the hands of a Tzaddik, which is actually, that's the way the Midrash says. What does it mean the land became elevated? Like it became more holy. It went from the hands of, the Rashi brings down a different thing. What it means it became elevated? It went miyad hetyot, from the commoner's ownership, yad melech, to the hands of a king. It's very interesting that would be, the Midrash, I understand. Going from the hands of a Rasha to the hands of a Tzaddik, I understand that. What is Rashi telling us? It went from the hands of a commoner to the hands of a king. And that's what the Lashon is, it became elevated. All right. Okay. Then the pasuk seems that at the end, the verse, again, it says like this. It says, there's a verse 17. It says, I'm just going to read the verses to you. 17 says, and the Ephron's field, which was in the Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field in the cave, was confirmed, was elevated as a purchase for Avram in the eyes of the children of Chaev, who came to the gate of the city when it happened. So this mentions already 17. It already says it was transferred. And then again it mentions it right 20. Thus the field, the cave was confirmed to Avram from the children of Chaev. I don't see anyone ask that question, but it says twice. Twice it says it transferred. In 17 it says it transferred, and then it says in 20 it transferred. Seems like just redundancy, that the land transferred from Avram to Mordechai. So let's just review and we'll see, then we'll try to start answering this. One question we have, just understanding the Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra says the purpose of these 20 psukim is to show us that the importance of being buried in Eretz Yisrael, and that this is the beginning of fulfillment of the land will be given to the Avram's descendants. The Ramban asks, she died in Eretz Yisrael. How do we see that as showing that you should bury somebody in Eretz Yisrael? If a person dies there, obviously you're not going to take him out of Eretz Yisrael once they die there. And second of all, the fulfillment is 400 years later with Yeshua, not now. Was one question. Then we wanted to know, why is Avram schlepping in the Bnei Ches? Just deal directly with Ephron. Why does he even have to deal with Ephron? He has a lot of properties of his own. You have to even go through all of this and go through what's the test? Just bury her in your backyard. You have a tremendous amount of property. Bury her there. What's the whole test? Then it says they used specifically kesef, which is over la socher. Over la socher. And Rashi says what that means. Over la socher means it's money that is accepted everywhere. It's like an international. Why? Why it have to be shemekablin b'shekel b'chol makom? Why it have to be that kind of money? What does it mean the land was elevated from the hands of a hedyot, a commoner, to the hands of a king? Why would that be the pronouns that are used, to the hands of a king? And then it seems at the end, to be there was 2 transactions. It's mentioned twice. Transferred to Avram. Why did I have to mention it? Okay, so one last question. In Parshas Vayishlach, we have when Yaakov Avinu came back from the house of Lavan, he purchases a property in Shechem. And the Gemara says he purchased it and he established Vayiken. It says Vayiken, he said he used Mea Kashita, I think Kashita is a number there. And also very similar, it's money, Rashi brings down over there, also money that is like an international type of currency, and he established coinage. Like a little municipality, like Yaakov's municipality. And the Ibn Ezra asked the same question, why do we need to know that? They purchased land all over the place. What's important? It's telling you the importance of buying a piece of property in Israel. Important of buying a property. And again, they're on bonds. They owned lots of land in Eretz Yisrael. What does it have to tell me that for? But the Medrash says something unbelievable. The Medrash says is that there are 3 purchases in the Torah. The 3 purchases that are highlighted in the Torah. There's a purchase of Avram when he bought Marasa Machpelah. There is Yaakov when he purchased the property in Shechem, and Rashi alludes to it over here. And there's David HaMelech when he purchased the Harabayas from the Aravna, from the king Aravna, to be the place where the Beis HaMikdash would be built. And the Medrash concludes that the Torah is highlighting these 3 purchases, these 3 areas, because these are areas that in the future the Goyim are going to question we own them. Interesting Medrash. Get an insight, I think, into that Medrash. Okay. Anybody that owns property, okay, we own a house in Valley Village. Right? Do we actually really own it to do whatever we want? Technically.
No.
Well, really, if you own a house in any country today, in the United States today, it's like a long-term lease, honestly. It's like you don't really, means you are subject to the governance and zoning. If they don't want you to, if you have to paint white fences, then you have to paint white fences. And if you need, and you need special permission to do any changes. And so you don't actually, it's not like it's an outright ownership. And there's even more. If let's say they've decided that they want to expand the 101, and now they want to take the next half a mile of property, they're going to flatten out. There's something called the right of eminent domain, that the authorities have a right to come over to you and say, we feel that this is fair market value, take the money, and you're out of here. You can't stop them. So technically, the fact that you own a house or you own a property in any locale, it just means that they've given you the right to be the owner for that period of time or for that, but within the limits of the rights that they have. They can take it away from you. The authorities can take something away from you. You don't have a right to take it. So therefore, the majority of purchases that exist do not give they're within the, subject to the authorities and of the locale within which you make that purchase, because the sovereign is the true owner of that property. Okay? There is one exception. That is when you have something that's called a sovereign purchase. For example, United States negotiated a sale with the French government to purchase Louisiana. It's known as Louisiana Purchase. Or the United States negotiated a sale with Russia. What did they purchase from Russia? Alaska. Right? When you have what's called a sovereign purchase, so in case we have a sovereign purchase, you are not subject now to the dictates of the sovereignty in which that land was. There's an ownership transfer now where it now becomes subject to the new owners, the new sovereign have now sovereignty on that piece of property. That piece of property now is no longer French property, it's United States property. It's no longer Russian property, it is American property. And usually in those cases, what do they use for consideration? Right? You know, what do they usually use? So now the problem is that you want to show that it's a sovereign purchase, so they can't use francs or dollars because that's the money of each separate locale. They use gold. Gold very often is used in a sovereign transferal because gold has the same value and is reflected the same ownership for both parties. They'll use something like gold. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Louisiana purchase, and Alaska was purchased with gold for that reason. But again, that's the difference. There is one thing that's similar to that, by the way. When a nation builds an embassy in another nation, the actual property of the embassy is not subject to the jurisdiction of the country where that embassy is found, but actually is considered to be the property of the nation that has purchased it. That's why you have protective. People try run to another. Why do they try run there? Because you're not subject anymore to the local authorities. You are considered to be you run to the Israeli embassy. You're Israel technically, legally, and not in United States if you're in the Israeli consulate, in the embassy. That's how it works as well. It's the same idea, the ownership of sovereignty.
So they really literally buy the embassy
With their rights. They get when they buy whatever. I don't know exactly how they use that, but it's considered legally. It's like legally now, like you're not subject to the rules of the local. You're subject to the rules of the embassy. Right? Now, we're going to go through the psukim again. We're going to review it, but we're going to see over here is that what Avram is trying to do here. Avram is not trying to just do a regular purchase of property. He doesn't need to do a regular purchase of property. Why doesn't he need to do a regular purchase of property? He owns. Avram owns a lot of property. The problem is that the property that Avram owns is under which jurisdiction? It's under Chiti.
Yeah.
It's under the Chiti jurisdiction. What Avram is trying to do here, we'll show it with psukim, what Avram is trying to do is trying to do a sovereign purchase. He wants this property to become Avram land, not to be Chiti land. That's what he's trying to do here. So now let's go back and see the questions, because, why does Avram have to have the Bnei Chet involved? Because if Avram just deals directly with Ephron, so then he hasn't really accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He is going over to a local businessman, and he's purchasing a property from the local businessman. That land is still subject to the local authorities. He hasn't done anything. What Avram's trying to do here is twofold. Yes, he needs to deal with whoever owns the property right now, but he wants it to be more than just a local purchase. He wants it to be a sovereign purchase, a transferal of authority. In order for that to happen, who does he have to have involved? The Bnei Ches. He has to have the government. It has to be a governmental. Right? Now, what the Torah is telling us is that to make it a little easier, is that day Ephron was actually elevated. He wasn't just he was elevated to become a government official as well. That's probably because that now allows what Avram's trying to accomplish. Obviously needs the permission of the Bnei Ches, which is why they're there, but it allows for the transferal of ownership from that one sale to be considered both a private sale as well as a sovereign purchase, a sovereign sale as well. So now let's go through some of the questions that we had. He doesn't use his own property, we understand, because that wouldn't accomplish what he needs to do. He has to have Bnei Ches because it has to be a sovereign purchase. He needs to have it on that level as well. All right? This land is elevated. We ask the question, elevated should go from the hands of a Rasha to the hand of a Tzaddik. No, that's not the point. The elevation over here, it's a transferal of status. It's becoming the hands of a king. It's being transferred into the hands of it's Avram's status of king that it's being transferred. It's being elevated from Canaani land, from Hittite land, to becoming Avram land. That's why the Tekuma, the elevation. It's transferred. That's what it means over here, that it's being transferred. And we understand now why you need to have over lasocher. It has to be international currency, money that is accepted everywhere, because in order to show that this is a sovereign purchase, you cannot use Hittite money. You cannot use the local money. It has to be sovereign money in order for that to be able to take place. Now let's go back and answer the Ibn Ezra. It's beautiful. The Ibn Ezra says that Sarah Imeinu, you see from here the importance of being buried in Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban's question is, she died in Eretz Yisrael. How do you see any importance? Mistake. She died in Eretz Canaan. Where did he bury her? He buried her in Eretz Yisrael. What Avram was accomplishing, he was taking this little piece of property and changing its status, that this little property is no longer Eretz Chiti, it's no longer Eretz Canaan. Why? Because he wants his wife not to be buried in Canaani land. He wants his wife to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. From here you see, says the Ibn Ezra, the importance of being buried in Eretz Yisrael. That's what you see from here. And the second question is also, the Ramban says that, how do you see from here the beginning of the land being given to Avram and his descendants? That happens 400 years later. 400 years later, they do come back and they take back the majority of the land. But that transference starts here. Here the land starts transferring from Canaani property to becoming Eretz Yisrael property. You do see that happening here. And the one last point over here is what the Medrash is saying. The Medrash says there's three properties. In all three cases, we see, here it calls it over la socher, international money. By Yaakov, it says mea kashita. Kashita is also chorfin. Rashi says it's money that's accepted everywhere. It's a type of whatever the consideration was accepted everywhere. And David HaMelech also, he purchased from Aravna. They were all three sovereign purchases. They were changing the status to become Eretz Yisrael property. That what the Medrash says. Why are those three places where the Torah highlights? It's not every purchase they made is being highlighted. Specifically those three, because there were sovereign purchases. Why did our Avos and David HaMelech go out of their way to make a sovereign purchase in those particular cases? Because those are the areas that are going to be most contested land for the Jewish people. Let's go through them. Hebron, right? Shechem, and East Jerusalem. It's the Harabais and the Parsha. Those are three areas that are today the most contested lands. The Medrash is saying some 2,000 years ago that these lands were purchased with a sovereign purchase to deflect the attempt to show that they're not Jewish owned. That the Torah went out of their way to show they were sovereignly purchased by Avram, Yaakov, and David HaMelech, so no one should be able to contest these. But what's happening here is this is not a regular run-of-the-mill purchase. This is what's called a sovereign purchase, because Avram wanted his wife to be buried in the holy land of Eretz Yisrael and not in the Tameh land of Eretz Canaan.
But you also know that this is a place, Machpelah, it's in this place and it's holy. And